When people talk about growing old, they often imagine peace. A quiet house filled with memories. Maybe the laughter of grandchildren running through the halls, or the comforting smell of tea on a Sunday morning. I used to imagine that too. I thought that after all the years of hard work, of raising a child on my own, I would finally rest, surrounded by warmth, love, and the family I helped build. But life, it doesn't always follow the pictures we paint in our heads. The day I realized that love can feel like distance, that family can sit right beside you and still make you feel invisible, was the day my heart quietly broke. It wasn't a loud heartbreak. There were no harsh words, no shouting, no big arguments, just silence. Polite, cold, unspoken silence. And that silence came from the woman my son called his wife. My name is Margaret. Most people call me Maggie. For most of my life, it was just me and my son Daniel. His father passed away when he was 7, a sudden heart attack that left both of us standing at the edge of a world that felt too big, too empty. Daniel was my reason to keep going. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at the grocery store, evenings at a small bakery downtown. My hands were always tired, my feet always sore. But every time I saw his little smile when I came home, it was worth it. He'd run to me at the door with his school bag half open, shouting, "Mama, I drew something for you." And I'd look at his scribbles on paper, colorful, messy, full of life, and tell him it was the most beautiful art in the world. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I always said, "We may not have a big house, Danny, but this little home is filled with love." And he'd nod and hug me so tight, like he understood what love truly meant even as a boy. As Daniel grew older, our home changed in small ways. The drawings on the fridge were replaced with his school certificates. The toy cars on the shelf gave way to books and a small guitar. He had dreams, big ones. He wanted to study engineering, to build things that would last. When he got a scholarship, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I realized he was stepping into a new world, one that didn't need me the way it once did. But I was proud. So proud. I remember the morning he left for university. The bus was already running when he hugged me and said, "Mama, I'll call you every night." And he did. At least for the first few months. Then the calls became shorter, sometimes missed. He'd say, "Sorry, Mama, I've been busy with exams," or "I met some new friends." I understood, or at least I tried to. That's what mothers do, don't they? We let go, piece by piece, until there's barely anything left to hold on to. It was 3 years later when I first heard her name, Rachel. He mentioned her casually one evening over the phone. "Mama," he said with that cheerful tone I hadn't heard in a while, "there's someone I want you to meet." I smiled through the phone. "Oh, a friend?" He laughed softly. "Maybe more than that. Something in my heart stirred, a mix of happiness and fear. Every mother dreams of seeing her child loved and cared for. But there's also a quiet ache, a whisper that says, someone else will now take your place." When they finally came to visit, I spent the whole week cleaning the house. I changed the curtains, baked Daniel's favorite apple pie, and even put fresh flowers on the table, daisies, his childhood favorite. When they walked in, I saw her. Rachel was beautiful, tall, graceful, with kind eyes and a polite smile. She greeted me with a soft hug and said, "It's so nice to finally meet you. Mrs. Langford, please," I said, smiling. "Call me Maggie." She nodded, though I could tell she wasn't the type who easily relaxed around people. During dinner, I watched the way Daniel looked at her, with a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. He laughed more than usual, talked more than usual, and I realized then he was in love. That night, after they left, I sat in the quiet kitchen, still smelling of pie and coffee, and whispered to myself, "She seems lovely. I hope she loves him the way I do." When Daniel and Rachel got married, it was a simple ceremony. I remember sitting in the second row, my heart swelling with both pride and loss. When they said their vows, I felt tears slip down my cheek, not from sadness, but from the beauty of seeing my little boy become a man. After the wedding, they moved into a house about 30 minutes away. For the first few months, Daniel would visit often, bringing groceries, fixing things around my small home, calling every evening just to check in. Then, slowly, those visits became less frequent. The calls shorter. I told myself he's building his life. That's what's supposed to happen. But sometimes, late at night, I'd sit with my cup of tea and stare at the phone, wondering if he'd forgotten to call, or just chosen not to. One afternoon, Daniel called and said, "Mama, how would you feel about moving in with us? We have a guest room and it'd be easier for you." I hesitated. "Are you sure, dear?" "I don't want to be in the way," he laughed. "You could never be in the way, Mama." Those words warmed my heart. For the first time in years, I felt wanted again. When I arrived at their home, Rachel greeted me politely. The house was beautiful, modern, clean, with everything in perfect order. She showed me to my room, a small but cozy space with a window overlooking the garden. "I hope it's comfortable enough," she said. "It's lovely," I replied. "Thank you for having me," she smiled faintly. Of course, the first few weeks were peaceful. I'd wake early, make breakfast, and leave coffee ready for them before they went to work. I cleaned, watered the plants, and cooked dinner sometimes. Small gestures the way mothers do. Daniel was happy to have me there. He'd come home and say, "It feels nice, Mama. The house smells like home again." Rachel would smile politely, though sometimes I caught her eyes drifting away. At first, I thought she was just tired from work. But as days turned into weeks, I began to notice small things, quiet things, the way she'd rewash dishes after I cleaned them, the way she'd sigh softly when I rearranged the pantry, or how she'd glance at Daniel when I told a story, as if silently asking him to change the subject. They were little moments, nothing cruel, nothing said aloud, but they carried weight, and slowly I began to feel it. The space between us, not a wall built in a day, but a distance growing one unspoken moment at a time. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I tried my best to keep things light, to stay helpful, to stay grateful. I didn't want to be a burden. Each morning I'd get up before sunrise. I'd make coffee, toast, and sometimes scrambled eggs, the way Daniel liked them when he was little. When they came down, Rachel would always thank me politely, but she never took a bite. Instead, she'd pour herself a green smoothie from the fridge and say, "Oh, I've started this new routine, trying to eat clean in the mornings." She wasn't rude, just distant. And yet somehow her politeness hurt more than open coldness ever could. Daniel didn't notice. He'd sit beside her at the table, scrolling through his phone, smiling occasionally when I tried to make small talk. "Did you sleep well, Danny?" I'd ask. "Yeah, Mama, just tired from work," he'd answer, without looking up. Sometimes I'd tell him stories from the past, about how he used to refuse to go to bed without his favorite blanket, or how he once tried to make me breakfast at 5 years old and almost burned the pan. He'd laugh for a second. But Rachel would just smile tightly, then glance at the clock. "I should get going," she'd say, and the moment would end. The silence that followed was heavy, not cruel, just full of things neither of us knew how to say. As weeks passed, I began to notice that the home was changing. Not in big ways, but in little, quiet ones. My teacups disappeared from the kitchen shelf. The family photo I'd placed on the hallway table, Daniel's graduation picture with me standing beside him, was replaced by a vase of fresh lilies. One afternoon, while tidying up the living room, I found the photo inside a drawer. I stared at it for a long while, my hand resting on the edge of the drawer before gently placing it back. It wasn't the photo that hurt me. It was the message, unspoken, but clear. This is not your space anymore. One evening, I decided to make dinner, a small surprise. Chicken stew with herbs, warm bread, and the same pie I used to bake when Daniel was a boy. The house smelled of garlic and rosemary, and for a moment I felt alive again, useful, part of something. When they came home, Daniel's face lit up. "Mama, that smells amazing." But Rachel froze for a second at the doorway. "Oh, you cooked tonight?" Her tone wasn't angry, just surprised, maybe slightly uneasy. "Yes," I said softly. "I thought it'd be nice for you both to come home to a warm meal." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "That's really sweet of you, Maggie. But I already prepped dinner this morning. We were supposed to have pasta tonight." My hands trembled slightly as I wiped them on the apron. "Oh, I didn't know. I'm sorry, dear." Daniel stepped in quickly. "It's fine, babe. We can have Mom's stew tonight and your pasta tomorrow." But the moment had already shifted. Rachel nodded politely, said nothing more, and went upstairs to change. We ate in quiet that night. The stew tasted bland to me, not because of the food, but because of the silence sitting between every spoonful. Later that night, I sat by the small window in my room, looking out at the garden. The lights outside flickered softly, and I could see my reflection in the glass. Older, gentler, lonelier. I whispered to myself, maybe I'm doing too much. Maybe I should step back. The next morning, I decided to change. I stopped cooking unless asked. I didn't tidy up their bedroom, even when I noticed laundry piled up. I kept my distance, politely, quietly, without complaint. But the strange thing about distance is, it grows even faster when you stop reaching out. Rachel seemed more at ease when I wasn't around much. She'd hum while cooking, talk to Daniel about work, or laugh softly over coffee. Sometimes I'd hear them from my room, their laughter mixing with the sound of morning sunlight. And, though I was happy he had that joy, part of me ached quietly in the dark. One Saturday afternoon, I was tending the garden, trimming the roses and watering the small herbs I'd planted by the fence. Rachel came out with her cup of tea. For a moment, I hoped we might talk, maybe finally share a bit of warmth. She stood nearby watching me work, then said softly, "You really love gardening, don't you?" I smiled. "Yes, it keeps me calm. Plants are quiet, but they give so much back." She nodded, looking down at the soil. After a pause, she added, I like things neat, that's all. Sometimes it feels a bit crowded out here." Her words were gentle, but they settled heavy in my chest. I looked at the flowers I'd nurtured from tiny seeds, the only color in my days, and said quietly, "I understand. I can move some of them if you'd like." "Oh no, you don't have to," she said quickly, taking a sip of her tea. "It's just, I like things minimal, you know?" She smiled again, and for the first time, I realized she wasn't being cruel. She was just someone who didn't know how to share space with another person's history. And I was that history. One evening, I was walking down the hallway to grab a glass of water. Their bedroom door was slightly open, and I heard Rachel's voice. Quiet, tired. "Danny, I just feel like we don't have any privacy anymore. She's always here, always doing things. It's hard to feel at home." My heart froze. Daniel's voice came next, calm and reassuring. "She means well, Rach. She's just trying to help." "I know," Rachel sighed. I wish she'd live closer instead of with us. It's starting to feel suffocating." There was silence, then Daniel said softly, "We'll figure something out." I stood there in the dark, holding my breath, not angry, not even surprised, just quietly breaking. I tiptoed back to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. The sound of my heartbeat felt louder than their voices ever could. The next morning, I acted normal. I smiled, made tea, and asked how they slept. Rachel said, "Fine, thank you," without looking up. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I never wanted to make her uncomfortable. But the words got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. So instead, I smiled. A soft, tired smile that said, "I hear you, even if you never meant me to." That day, I started packing little by little. Not because they asked me to leave, but because I knew it was time to give them the space they needed. A week later, my old friend Clara came to visit. She looked around the house and said, "It's lovely here, Maggie, but you don't seem yourself." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just adjusting." She looked at me knowingly. "You've always taken care of everyone, dear. But who's taking care of you now?" Her words lingered long after she left. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what it means to belong, and how easily that belonging can fade when love turns into obligation. I began spending more time outside, at the park, at the nearby library, anywhere but home. Daniel noticed once and said, "Mama, you've been out a lot lately. Everything okay?" I smiled. "Yes, dear. I just enjoy the fresh air." He nodded, not suspecting a thing. But deep inside, I was preparing myself, quietly, slowly, to say goodbye. Because sometimes, love means leaving before you're asked to, and sometimes it means smiling while doing it. The day I decided to leave began like any other. Morning. Light streamed through the curtains, touching the walls with quiet warmth. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. Daniel had already left for work, and Rachel was upstairs finishing a video call. The house was silent. Too silent. It was the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but heavy. Like something unspoken sitting between walls. I watched the dust move in the sunlight and thought, maybe this isn't my home anymore. Maybe it never truly was. Rachel came downstairs, dressed neatly in her pale blue cardigan. Her perfume filled the air, delicate but sharp, like jasmine after rain. She saw me sitting there and smiled politely. "Morning, Maggie. Did you sleep well?" I nodded. "I did, thank you. You?" "Pretty good," she said, pouring herself coffee. "I have a long day ahead. A client meeting, then some errands." I hesitated, wanting to say something, anything, that might bridge the quiet space between us. Instead, I asked, "Would you like me to make dinner tonight?" She paused, the coffee pot midair. Then she set it down gently. "Oh, actually, we'll be eating out tonight. Daniel's taking me to that new Italian place." I smiled faintly. "That sounds lovely." There was a pause, one of those long, careful pauses where both people know there's more to say, but neither dares to say it. She sat across from me, stirring her coffee. The spoon clinked softly against the mug. Then, almost too softly to hear, she said, "Maggie, can I be honest with you?" I looked up, my heart thudding quietly. "Of course." She sighed, her hands folded around the cup. "You've been so kind since you came. You've helped with cooking, cleaning, everything. I really appreciate it." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes didn't meet mine. She took a breath. "It's just, Daniel and I haven't had much time to ourselves since you moved in. It's been an adjustment, you know?" I nodded slowly. "I understand." Then she looked up, and her voice softened even more. "I don't want this to sound harsh, but maybe it's time you had your own space again. Somewhere you can feel comfortable and we can—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "We can have our home back." The words fell like tiny stones into the silence. For a moment, I thought I might cry. But no tears came. Only a strange calmness, like the sea right before a storm. I smiled instead. "Of course, dear. You don't need to explain." "I understand completely." Her shoulders relaxed, as if she'd been holding her breath. "You're not upset?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You've been more than kind letting me stay this long." But inside, something delicate had cracked. Quietly, invisibly. That evening, when they went out to dinner, I began to pack. I moved slowly, folding clothes with careful hands, each piece carrying a memory. The sweater Daniel gave me one Christmas, the scarf I knitted when I first moved in, I took down the small photo I'd placed by the window, the one of Daniel at his college graduation. His arm around me, both of us smiling, unaware of the years that would follow. The house was still. Only the sound of rain tapped against the window. I whispered to the photo, "You've made a beautiful life, my boy. You don't need me here anymore." I didn't resent Rachel. In her eyes, I was a reminder of another world. One she hadn't built, one she didn't fit into. She needed her own space, and Daniel needed peace between the two women he loved. So I made the decision for them. When they came home later that night, they looked happy. Daniel was laughing as he carried leftovers into the kitchen. Rachel leaned against the doorway, smiling softly. "Mama, you're still up?" he said. I smiled back. "Couldn't sleep. I thought I'd wait for you." He kissed my forehead. "We missed you at dinner." I nodded. "I'm glad you two had a nice night." He didn't notice the half-packed suitcase beside the couch. Maybe he thought I'd just been tidying up. We talked a little about the food, the weather, his work, simple things that meant everything in moments like these. When they went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, letting the silence settle around me. I looked around at the house. The neat shelves, the flickering lamp, the faint scent of lavender from Rachel's candles. It was a beautiful home, just not mine. Before dawn, I sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. I wrote slowly, my hands shaking slightly. "My dear Daniel, you've grown into the kind of man every mother dreams of raising. Kind, hardworking, gentle. I'm proud of you every single day. I want you to know that I'm not leaving because of anything you did. You've given me more love than I could ever ask for. But I think it's time you and Rachel build your life together. Just the two of you. I'll be fine, my boy. I promise. All I've ever wanted is your happiness. Love always, Mom." I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. When morning came, the sun was pale and cold. I carried my suitcase to the door, my steps quiet on the wooden floor. The house still smelled of coffee and cinnamon. Rachel must have started breakfast early. She turned when she saw me standing there with my coat on. "Oh, are you going somewhere?" I smiled. "Yes, dear. I think it's time I head back to my old place for a while." Her expression flickered. Surprise, guilt, maybe relief. "Oh, you don't have to rush, Maggie." We didn't mean. I stopped her gently. "It's all right. I've stayed long enough." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached out and touched my hand. "Thank you." For understanding, I nodded, still smiling. "Take good care of him." "He's a good man," she nodded back. "I will." I stepped outside, the air cool against my face. The garden looked different that morning. Smaller somehow, now that it no longer belonged to me. As I walked down the path, suitcase in hand, I heard the door close softly behind me. The taxi driver helped me with my bag and asked where I was headed. I gave him my old address, the small apartment I'd kept after my husband passed. As we drove away, I glanced back once. The house stood still, golden light in the windows, the home of the family I once belonged to. I whispered quietly, "Be happy, my son." Then I turned my face toward the road ahead. The city passed by in soft blurs of color, trees, shops, people laughing at bus stops. Life continued, as it always does. But in that quiet space inside my chest, something had changed forever. When I returned to my small apartment, it felt both familiar and strange. The key slid into the lock just the way it used to. The door creaked as if it remembered me. The faint smell of dust and old wood drifted through the air. I set my suitcase by the wall and stood there quietly for a long time, listening to the silence. There were no footsteps upstairs, no voices, no clinking of dishes or laughter down the hall. Just me. And for the first time in a long while, that realization didn't frighten me. It just felt real. I spent the first few days cleaning. It gave my hands something to do, something to keep my thoughts from wandering too far. I wiped every surface, opened every window, let the sunlight pour in. I brewed tea in the same chipped kettle I'd used for years. Its whistle was a kind of comfort. An old friend calling out, "I'm still here." At night, I would sit by the window with a small blanket over my shoulders, watching the city lights blink like stars. Sometimes, I imagined Daniel and Rachel at their dinner table, laughing over pasta or watching a movie together. A small ache would rise in my chest, not of anger, but of longing. I missed him, of course I did. But I also knew this quiet was what we both needed. Days turned into weeks. I thought Daniel would call. I waited by the phone every evening, telling myself he was probably just busy with work. Sometimes I even rehearsed what I'd say when he did call. "I'm fine, sweetheart," or "Don't worry about me." But the phone stayed silent. I didn't blame him. I knew him too well. He was caught in the middle, trying to love his wife and honor his mother at the same time. It's a kind of burden no one should have to carry. Still, every night before bed, I whispered a quiet prayer for him. That he'd find peace. That Rachel would be kind. That their love would last. Slowly, I began to rebuild small routines. Every morning, I'd walk to the park nearby. I'd feed breadcrumbs to the pigeons and smile at the old man who sold newspapers by the bench. He once asked me, "You come here every day. Waiting for someone?" I smiled softly. "No, just keeping myself company." He nodded like he understood, and perhaps he did. I started volunteering at the community kitchen twice a week. It was simple work, stirring soup, serving bread, but the warmth of the people filled the spaces that silence used to occupy. There was a woman there named Nora, with silver hair and eyes that held stories of their own. She told me once, sometimes being alone doesn't mean being lonely. Sometimes it just means you're learning to love your own company again. Her words stayed with me. One rainy evening, I sat on the couch reading an old book when there was a knock at the door. It startled me. Few people ever visited. I opened the door slowly, and there he was, Daniel. His hair was damp from the rain. His eyes tired but full of something I couldn't name. He looked older, not in years, but in the quiet way guilt makes a person grow up. "Mama," he said softly. "Can I come in?" My throat tightened. "Of course, sweetheart. You don't have to ask." He stepped inside, wiping his feet carefully like he used to when he was a boy. The sight made me smile. "Tea?" I asked. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Please." We sat across from each other, just like we used to. 2 cups of tea between us, steam curling in the quiet. He looked down, twisting his hands together. "I should have called," he said finally. I stayed silent. "I didn't know how," he continued. "After you left, the house felt different. Rachel felt guilty, I think, but she didn't know how to make it right." He took a shaky breath. I should have stood up. I should have said something. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Daniel," I said softly, "you don't owe me an apology. I left because I wanted you both to have peace." He shook his head. "But you shouldn't have had to leave your home for that." I smiled gently. "Home isn't always a place, my love. Sometimes it's just the people we carry in our hearts." He looked at me for a long time, eyes shining, lips trembling slightly. Then he whispered, "I miss you, Mama." That's when my heart finally broke. Not from sadness, but from the deep, wordless love only a mother can feel. "I miss you too," I said, "but I'm proud of you. You've built a good life. Don't lose it trying to fix what doesn't need fixing." He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. When he left that evening, he hugged me longer than usual. As he walked out the door, he turned back and said, "Rachel wants to see you soon. She's been thinking a lot about what happened." I smiled faintly. "Tell her there's no rush. Time has a way of healing what words cannot." He nodded and disappeared down the hallway, his footsteps echoing softly. When the door closed, I stood there for a long time, letting the warmth of his hug linger. I looked around the little apartment, my plants, my books, the quiet hum of the clock on the wall, and for the first time, it truly felt like home. A few weeks later, There was another knock on my door. When I opened it, I saw Rachel standing there. Her eyes were nervous, her hands clutching a small bag. "Hi, Maggie," she said quietly. I smiled. "Hello, dear. Come in." She stepped inside, her gaze wandering around the small space. "It's cozy," she said. "Small, but it fits me just fine," I replied. We sat down. She handed me the bag. "I brought some pastries. From that bakery you liked." I opened it, my favorite lemon scones. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. For a moment, we sat in silence. Then she said softly, "I owe you an apology." I looked at her, her face open, eyes wet. She continued, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't know how to share him. You were always there, and I felt like I was losing my place in my own home." Her voice cracked slightly. "But I see now, you weren't trying to take anything from me. You were just being a mother." I reached for her hand. "And you were just being a wife." She blinked back tears. "I forgive you, Rachel," I said quietly. "You were never cruel, just human. We all have our fears." Her lips trembled. "Thank you." We spent the afternoon talking about Daniel, about the garden, about how we could start fresh. Before she left, she said, "Would you come for dinner sometime?" "I think we'd all like that." I smiled, this time without hesitation. "I'd love to." When she left, I stood at the window, watching her car disappear down the street. The sky outside was clearing, pale blue pushing through the clouds. I thought to myself, sometimes love needs distance to grow back softer, kinder, and stronger. It's strange how life has a way of circling back, not to where we began, but to where we were meant to be all along. It's been almost a year since that night Rachel came to see me. Since then, I've visited their home a few times. Not often, just enough to see the garden bloom again, to share tea on the porch, to laugh quietly at the way time softens everything it touches. The tension that once hung in the air like fog has lifted. Now, when I visit, Rachel meets me with a smile. She pours tea before I even ask. And Daniel, well, he looks at us both with the kind of relief that only peace can bring. It's the small things that stay with you. The way Rachel asked me for my old stew recipe, finally admitting that she could never quite get the flavor right. The way Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, saying, This tastes like home." Or how, one quiet afternoon, Rachel placed a small photo frame on my kitchen table. Inside was a picture of the three of us, taken just weeks ago, standing in front of the garden, arms around each other laughing. She said, "I thought you might want to keep this one." And I did. Now it sits on my windowsill, catching the light in the morning, reminding me that forgiveness, real forgiveness, doesn't erase what happened. It transforms it. Sometimes I still visit the old house. Rachel and Daniel moved to a new place outside the city, but the old home remains, quiet, waiting. The garden I planted years ago has grown wild. Roses twist around the gate, ivy creeps along the fence. It's beautiful in its own way, untouched yet full of life. I stand there sometimes, feeling the wind on my face, listening to the soft hum of bees in the lavender. I think about how love can be like that, messy, untamed, but still growing even after you've stopped tending it every day. You learn to let it. These days, my life is simple, peaceful. I still volunteer at the kitchen. Nora and I sit together during breaks, laughing about small things, the way people argue over soup flavors, or how the pigeons always seem to find their way inside. Sometimes, when the sun starts to set, I take a slow walk to the park. The same bench, the same pigeons, the same quiet I used to fear, now a friend. I watch families pass by, mothers holding tiny hands, fathers chasing after toddlers with squeals of joy. And I smile. Not because I miss those days, but because I had them once. And that's enough. A few weeks ago, I found myself writing a letter. It wasn't meant to be sent, more like a whisper on paper. I wrote, "Dear Daniel, If you ever feel torn between two worlds again, remember, love isn't a competition. It's a bridge, and the strongest bridges are built when both sides meet halfway. Tell Rachel I think of her often, not as the woman who took my son, but as the woman who taught me to let go. She gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost, the chance to see my son as a man, not a boy who needed saving. As for me, I'm learning that endings are rarely final. Sometimes they're just quiet, beginnings wearing different clothes. I folded the letter and tucked it inside my favorite book. Between the pages, where the story once broke my heart, and then mended it again. As I sit here tonight, the lamp casting a warm glow across my small living room, I can hear the soft hum of the world outside. Cars passing, wind rustling through trees, someone's laughter floating up from the street below, and I think about how, a year ago, those sounds would have made me feel lonely. Now they make me feel alive. Life isn't perfect. It isn't neat or fair. It's full of sharp edges and soft landings, moments that bruise and moments that heal. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes, love asks you to stay. And sometimes, love asks you to leave so that everyone can grow into the space they were meant to fill. And when that happens, when you learn to walk away without bitterness, to forgive without forgetting, you don't lose people. You carry them differently. In the end, we all just want to be remembered, not for how long we stayed, but for how deeply we loved while we were there. Music fades out completely. The sound of a distant clock ticking, then silence.